This is you in the Ottoman Empire, and you've just slept with a vizier. At dawn, before he leaves, he glances around to make sure no one is watching. He slips one of his rings onto your finger while you're still asleep and drapes his embroidered handkerchief over your shoulder. That gesture seemed harmless, but it hid a detail that could turn it into a massive problem. Because a ring given in secret like that wasn't just a gift, it was a silent signal that you'd been chosen. And if it reached the wrong eyes, it stirred up dangerous suspicion. And if you add to that the fact that your fellow servants were starting to notice you wearing finer silks, moving through restricted parts of the palace, or vanishing some nights without explanation, the pieces were falling into place far too quickly. Because you hadn't been born into the body you were living in, inside the harem, and that secret weighed heavier than any other. That was the part that could actually cost you your life. Because as long as you pleased the vizier, he protected you. But all it took was disobeying him once, and in a fit of rage, he could point you out in front of everyone and reveal that deep down, you weren't the woman you'd been pretending to be. And people who deceived others that way were treated by the court as cursed creatures, children of the devil who had broken the sacred order of the body. What awaited them wasn't a simple execution, it was something designed so that no one would ever forget the example made of them. This is where things started to get complicated, because once someone that powerful began protecting you, a completely different game began. The game of disappearing in plain sight. You couldn't go from carrying water to wearing jewels overnight. The change had to be slow, almost invisible. At first, you kept doing the same chores, but you looked for excuses to be present at the evening gatherings, to serve at banquets, or to carry messages to the private chambers. Luckily for you, the harem was already full of figures who didn't fully fit as men or as women. Eunuchs, castrated as boys, were the only ones allowed to move freely between the women and men of the palace, which made them trusted guardians and messengers. That custom worked in your favor. In a world where someone like that could move everywhere without raising suspicion, you too could blur those same lines. Little by little, your clothes improved, you moved through places you'd once been forbidden to enter, and step by step, you got closer to his inner circle. But that's where the danger lived. If someone pieced it all together too soon, the rumor could explode before your position was secure. And in an Ottoman court where special treatment already bred envy, and where presenting yourself as a gender other than the one you'd been assigned was seen as an unforgivable deception, the combination of the two was a bomb too big to contain. All it took was for the story to reach the wrong people, and you'd be dragged to the square and impaled in front of everyone. And to complete the humiliation, they smeared your genitals with honey so the birds would swoop down and peck them off while you were still breathing, until it killed you, turned into a warning for anyone who thought about following your path. But the story had another side. If you were the vizier, or even the sultan himself, everything changed completely. In the Ottoman court, belonging to the elite meant access to every kind of luxury and pleasure, no matter who it came from. In the private chambers, the baths, the enclosed gardens, the Kochek dancers offered far more than a performance, and as long as your status stayed high, no one questioned your preferences. But that friendly face was reserved only for the powerful. For everyone else, a body that didn't fit the mold was paid for in blood. And the Ottoman Empire was neither the first nor the cruelest to collect that price. Thousands of years before a sultan, a harem, or a single one of these laws existed, there was a time and place where someone like you didn't hide in the hallways. You walked barefoot through the center of the temple, and no one dared touch you. You're in Mesopotamia, more than 4,000 years ago, a place where someone like you didn't have to hide from anyone because you were the right hand of a goddess. You are sacred, one of the people we'd call trans today, though that word doesn't exist yet and won't for millennia. Here instead, you go by another name, intermediary between worlds. Some of these people were born with a man's body and chose to castrate themselves to better serve the goddess. Others simply lived as women from childhood because that's how Ishtar called them in a dream, or because the priests recognized a sign at birth. Whichever path brought them there, the result was the same. They were the ones who led the most delicate rites, who sang the laments for the dead, who beat the drums in the sacred processions. On the cuneiform tablets of Sumer, it's written with a clarity that's still striking today. The goddess Ishtar had the power to turn man into woman, and woman into man, and those who lived at that crossing point belonged to her. That's why you eat inside the temples, sleep under roofs others will never set foot on, and kings consult you before going to war. You are a necessary piece of the sacred machinery. But what's happening in Mesopotamia is the gentlest memory history will keep for millennia to come. Now imagine you're in Rome and you've just cut off your own genitals with a shard of broken pottery. It's the dies sanguinis, the day of blood. The music has carried you for hours into a state you no longer recognize. The cold flutes never stop. The drums are pounding your chest from the inside, and all around you, dozens of people are jumping, screaming, bleeding. Everyone is following Cybele, the great mother brought from Anatolia, and her lover Attis, the young god who castrated himself under a pine tree to belong to her completely. You've just done the same thing with a sharpened stone or a piece of broken pottery. In the heat of the frenzy, you've cut yourself. And now, as the blood runs down your thighs, you throw your genitals into the air, and they land somewhere in the crowd. If you survive the bleeding, and many don't, you'll become one of the Galli, the priestesses of Cybele, dressed in yellow robes and heavy jewelry, hair long and dyed, your voice trained for years into a higher register. The Romans look at you with an uneasy mix of fascination and disgust in equal measure. Your cult is legal. The Great Mother officially entered Rome in 204 BCE, invited by the Senate itself after consulting the Sibylline books. But at the same time, a Roman citizen is forbidden from becoming a Gallus. You're allowed to exist, but only if you come from outside, only if you're one of the others. And then there's the case everyone whispers about, but no one dares say out loud. Emperor Elagabalus took the throne at 14 years old in 218 CE, and from day one did things Rome had never seen before. He wore makeup, removed his body hair, asked to be called lady instead of lord. He married men in public ceremonies and offered an immense fortune, supposedly half the empire, to any physician who could give him a woman's body. No physician dared try, and his own Praetorian Guard eventually decided they'd seen enough. In March of 222, at just 18 years old, he was assassinated along with his mother. They dragged his body naked through the streets of Rome, tried to shove it down a sewer drain, and when it didn't fit, they threw it into the Tiber with weights tied to it so it could never float back up. That was the message. You can live on the margins here, but if you get too close to power while being what you are, power will send you back to the river. And while Rome was throwing its own emperor into the water, on the other side of the ocean, something even more brutal was taking shape. In Tenochtitlan, they're pulling your colon out with their bare hands, and you still haven't died. You're in the Mexica Empire deep in the 15th century, and someone has discovered you. Maybe they saw you entering a house you weren't supposed to be in. Maybe someone recognized that you were wearing clothes that didn't match the body you'd been assigned. Maybe you simply talked too much. The Mexica Code on this allows no nuance. If you took on a feminine role and had relations with another man, the punishment was carried out in front of everyone. First, they tied you down. Then they cut open your lower abdomen and pulled out your entrails, with special attention to the colon, because the Mexica saw that organ as the very symbol of dishonor. And once nothing was left inside, they lit the pyre and burned you alive, or whatever was left of you, and scattered the ashes so that not even the gods could find you in the afterlife. And this is where the story takes one of its cruelest turns, because when the Spanish arrive in 1519 and see this system of punishment, they don't bring relief. They bring something worse. In 1513, in what's now Panama, Vasco Núñez de Balboa finds a group of gender-crossing people in the court of the chief Carreta. His reaction is recorded by the chronicler Peter Martyr d'Anguera with chilling coldness. Balboa feeds 40 of these people to his war dogs, mastiffs trained to tear men apart. The animals rip them apart alive while the Spanish soldiers watch. And while in the Americas the dogs were doing the dirty work, on the other side of the world, someone was about to change the rules of the game with a single signature. You're born in India, in a small village, and at age 7, your family brings you to live with the Hijra. For centuries, that moment wasn't a tragedy. It was an initiation into a respected ancient community with a recognized place in the fabric of society. The Hijra already appear in the Ramayana, in the Mahabharata, and in the Kama Sutra itself, where they're described as a third gender, with the right to exist, to marry, to bless, and to curse. Under the Mughal Empire, between the 16th and 17th centuries, you held a kind of power that's hard to imagine today. You were advisors to kings. You guarded the imperial harems because no one was trusted the way you were with access to the emperor's wives and concubines. You managed treasuries, recited poetry at court. Your blessing at a birth or a wedding was paid for in gold, and your curse could ruin an entire family. And then in 1871, a British official signs a document called the Criminal Tribes Act, and overnight you go from sacred to criminal simply for having been born. The law doesn't accuse you of any specific crime. It declares you criminal by nature, by your very existence. The colonial police force you to register on special lists. They forbid you from appearing in public dressed as women, under threat of immediate arrest. They strip you of custody over the children you raised. And the British government's stated goal is written down with surgical coldness in the archives. Gradual extinction. In 2 decades, you go from being guardians of the emperor to being hunted by the law, from earning gold for your blessings to hiding in alleyways to avoid a jail cell. And this recipe, turning the revered into the hunted, is one the British would copy in every corner of the empire. You're on the plains of what's now New Mexico. It's 1886, and you've just been received at the White House as a diplomat for your people. Your name is Weiwa, you're from the Zuni people, and you're the Lhamana Watistoshad, what anthropologists would later start calling two-spirit, a person who carries 2 spirits, masculine and feminine, in a single body. Across dozens of native nations in North America, from the Lakota to the Navajo, the Crow, the Cheyenne, the Mojave, your role is sacred. You weave, you cook, you take part in rituals that neither men nor women alone are allowed to lead. When someone dies, you're the one who washes the body. When a child is born, you're the one who speaks the first words over them. And in 1886, the US government, without fully understanding what you are, invites you to Washington as a representative of your people. You spend 6 months in the capital, dine with senators, meet President Grover Cleveland, and everyone treats you like a distinguished lady. With no idea that in your community you're neither man nor woman, but something their categories simply can't name. But your case is the exception, not the rule. Because 3 centuries earlier, when the first European conquerors reached the continent, the reaction was identical to Balboa's in Panama. French chroniclers around the Great Lakes describe the two-spirit people with contempt and call them Badaches, Ew, an insult borrowed from Persian. English colonists hang them. The Spanish burn them at public stakes or feed them to the dogs. And little by little, the tribes learn the lesson. To survive under the white man's gaze, they start hiding their own sacred people, stop speaking of them, pretend they never existed. An entire spiritual category erased, not by conviction but by fear. And that fear had a very specific origin. A book and an idea that was about to change everything. Up until now, you could be killed for breaking social codes, for dishonoring your family, for offending a particular god. But now, for the first time in history, the way you dressed and existed had a name carved in stone, and that name was sin. Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 5 says it with a clarity that leaves no room for interpretation. A woman shall not wear a man's clothing, nor shall a man wear a woman's clothing, for whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord your God. What's revolutionary and terrifying is that the punishment no longer ends when your life does. Before, if you were executed in Tenochtitlan or drowned in a Germanic bog, your suffering ended there. Not anymore. Now the sentence continues after death, in an eternal hell with no way out, no possible redemption. Without public repentance, without humiliation, without renouncing what you are. Christianity picks up that line from Leviticus and Deuteronomy and turns it into universal doctrine. Islam, from the 7th century onward, adds its own interpretations, and even though homoerotic poetry and gender fluid figures flourished for centuries in some Islamic courts, the letter of the law remained hanging over everything like a sword from the ceiling, ready to fall whenever someone decided the time had come. And in many places, that moment didn't arrive naturally. It arrived on a ship. Colonialism did something no religion had managed on its own. It exported persecution at industrial scale. In 1860, the British Empire introduces Section 377 into India's penal code. It's a short paragraph that criminalizes carnal intercourse against the order of nature, with sentences of up to 10 years in prison, hard labor, and public flogging. This is the same India where the Hijra had once been imperial advisors, where the Kama Sutra had described desire between men with clinical normalcy. And Section 377 doesn't stay in India. It's copied word for word into every British colony: Nigeria, Uganda, Kenya, Ghana, Sudan, Malaysia, Singapore, Sri Lanka, Jamaica, Trinidad, Barbados. More than 40 countries inherit the exact same paragraph, written by a handful of Victorian officials who never once set foot in those territories. And here's the cruelest irony in this entire story. Today, most of those countries still keep that law on the books. They defend it as if it were part of their own tradition, as if it belonged to them, when in reality, it arrived on a ship carried by men in white wigs who don't even exist anymore. And just when it seemed like the colonial system had already flattened everything, in the very heart of Europe, a small building in Berlin was about to attempt something no one had ever done before. You're in Berlin, it's May 6th, 1933, and you watch as hundreds of Nazi students kick down the door of your building. That building is the Institute für Sexualwissenschaft, the Institute for Sexual Research, founded by physician Magnus Hirschfeld in 1919. For 14 years, this building has been the most advanced place in the world for studying gender identity and sexuality. This is where the term transsexual was coined for the first time. This is where the first sex reassignment surgeries in modern history were performed on Dora Richter in 1922 and on Lily Elber in 1930 and 1931. This is where people who would have been imprisoned anywhere else in the world found doctors, therapists, and a special passport signed by the Berlin police that let them dress according to their identity without being arrested. On May 6th, the Nazis tear it apart. They smash the shelves, rip down the paintings, and 4 days later, on May 10th, they haul more than 20,000 books and files out to the Opera Square and burn them in a bonfire. That's the infamous book burning that cameras around the world captured without fully grasping what was being destroyed. Decades of research, the clinical records of thousands of people, photographs, letters, all of it turned to ash. And then the worst begins. Trans people and gay people are sent to concentration camps, marked with the pink triangle, a badge that, in the camp's internal hierarchy, ranked among the worst, just below the yellow triangle worn by Jewish prisoners, subjected to experiments, forced castrations, worked to death. Dora Richter, the first transgender woman in history to undergo surgery, disappears after the assault on the institute. There's no record of her death, no grave, no file. She simply vanishes into the flames of May 1933, and nothing is ever known about her again. And when the war ends, when the world starts rebuilding itself, those survivors marked by the pink triangle receive no reparation. The law that had imprisoned them, paragraph 175, stays on the books in West Germany until 1969. Many go straight back to prison, others spend the rest of their lives in silence. And right now, as you exist reading this, the map of the world is still split in two. In more than 60 countries, you can still be sent to prison for living your identity. In about a dozen, the penalty is death, hanging, stoning, execution by firing squad. In dozens more, even where the formal law doesn't condemn you, the street does. Losing your job, being thrown out of your home, being unable to rent an apartment, unable to open a bank account under your real name. And here's the strange part. Much of the persecution trans people face today in Africa and the Caribbean doesn't come from ancestral tradition. It comes from colonial laws imported 2 centuries ago, written by Victorian officials in cultures that, before the colonizer ever arrived, would have called sacred the very thing they now persecute. Don't forget to support content like this by subscribing and check out this other video. It's really fascinating and you're going to love it.